Welcome, happy mamas. I'm Patricia Ribeiro Wolfson, also known as Trish, and here we are, another episode of Happy Mama TV. Today, our very special guest is a good friend of mine and wonderfully talented coach, Erin Browder, and she's here to talk to us about a really important topic. She's going to be teaching us 3 strategies to building your child's emotional awareness. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Trish. This is the first time that I'm actually sharing this information, so I'm really excited to bring it to a different audience with all the happy mamas, so thank you.
I'm so excited to have you here from the moment that Erin and I met, of course, online, because we haven't met in person yet, although I'm certain that's going to happen soon, and we'll give each other a real big hug in person. We connected right away because of her passion for helping children. And so, Erin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history and how you got into that?
Definitely. So I am a trained educator, and I worked in classrooms for 8 years. I actually started teaching in New York. And then I went on a leadership track, and I took some different leadership roles in the school site. And then I sought some other positions that really allowed me to have more of a bird's eye view and an influence on the larger school structure. And so for the last 5 years, I've been doing school transformation work. And that work is extremely important. And it's not, sometimes I don't like the stigma around transformation, that word, because it isn't as if things aren't, whole and complete and beautiful on their own. But what I do is I really come in and I shift the energy at the school site. So I come in, I work closely with teachers, I develop their leadership capacity, and then I work really closely with the leadership on identifying some of the shared vision, mission, identifying instructional priorities that everyone really wants and desires for their school, but for right now, and historically, they've been really far removed. So I work with schools that are low performing, schools that have a history of, high turnover, where people aren't feeling very connected to the school's overall mission and vision. And then that's some of the work that I do. And when we think about school culture and climate, we know it's as much about academics as it is about those non-academic factors. So as much as it's about social and emotional awareness and social emotional competence. And the work I was doing, I noticed that it wasn't just students that really needed that support and that also absorbed it, right? It was the adults in the building, because when they felt that their emotional capacity was stronger, their emotional awareness was stronger, they also, reflected a deeper connection to the school mission and vision, to the different relationships that they're having at the school site with each other, with students, with parents, with the school community, with administrators. So I've kind of done this whole school model for the last 4 to 5 years. And really, and I'm sure you'll get to this in a second, what's really compelled me is this idea of emotional climate and just understanding that we're all sharing a space together. And when we think about traditional, schools and behavior management, it's typically, a system of rules and a system of consequences, which have their place. I am not, discipline has its need, but emotional climate already starts to prompt thinking about what you're emitting and what you're absorbing, what you're giving out and what you're taking, and understanding that even though I'm in an authoritative position as a teacher, there's definitely ways that my emotions are impacting students just the same as, students are impacting me. So it starts a different dialogue, almost an emotional dialogue, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, well, I'll say that from the first time that we spoke, immediately as you were speaking about school culture, which is notoriously difficult to make change and transformation, I, in my head, immediately thought of home culture, which also, or family culture, which also is equally difficult to transform because it basically follows many of the same principles. You have, a discipline, model where the parent is the authoritative person, in that relationship, and they are doling out punishments and discipline based on behavior. And it really has a very similar culture. Maybe, because we were raised in that culture, and then that transfers from school, because that's how you keep an unruly group of people, and all school days, how do you keep an unruly group of people, listening? Well, you threaten or you give consequences or whatever. And that's so much of what's happening in family dynamic. And it's changing. I believe that culture is changing. But I thought immediately when you started speaking, I went, this is such an important topic, and you are so well versed in this discussion that I thought you were perfect to come on here, because it's so important.
Yeah.
So tell me.
And I do want to add one thing. As you were saying that, you made me think of, we look at schools, and certain social structures are very complex, right? Like at any given moment, any one person is feeling one way about something that just happened, and it kind of just offsets, and everything just layers on top of each other. And the same thing happens in our homes. Yeah. Right? At any given moment, I might be impacted by, what happened at work that day, the call that I just got, driving in my car with my mother, to my child who has also been impacted by 20 other different students in his class, so there's all these different things working at any moment. And I'm not going to say working against each other, but definitely they're impacted by each other. And it's really, even as we start thinking about our own individual emotional awareness, there's a sense of efficacy that comes with that. There's a sense of, naming that emotion, the power that it brings to you, and knowing that you have choices. Management is typically really a transactional relationship. It's, do this or I'm going, it's a cause and effect. Whereas emotional climate is definitely a transformational thing, because you're going to respond differently based on your emotions. And I mean, we'll get into that. And if I get too sciencey, you'll have to reel me back in, because that's all emotional intelligence.
It makes so much sense. And this is why myself and a lot of other, mom coaches specifically, we focus so much on the self-care, on putting yourself first, or putting yourself in the right frame of mind, or, when you're waking up in the morning, getting on the right footing. Because if you are in the right emotional state with yourself, it's much easier to handle whatever comes your way. So really, I think that that's kind of where we're going with the conversation, is to then be able to teach your children or empower your children to have that sort of emotional awareness. And so that you can both have that.
And I use emotional awareness because it is, it's not as heavy as emotional intelligence. And when we're thinking about how to teach students or teach children, it's definitely more open, and it gives us more variety as non-practitioners. But emotional intelligence is, in a nutshell, is really the marriage of emotions and like our cognitive capacity. So it's all the ways that we're feeling something, and then we start thinking, is this the time to respond, right? So impulsive, behavior is going to be on a lower spectrum of emotional intelligence, whereas something, like regret, or some emotions that we know we're feeling, but we suppress them, that, and then how we respond to that. And that's when it starts to get a little complex. And today I really want to think about, emotional intelligence and emotional regulation as we appraise a situation, right? We observe something that's happening, we think deeply about it, and we might analyze it, right? That's on the higher end of the spectrum. Or we might just kind of, do some cause and effect type thinking in our head. And then we choose, the next action. So after we appraise and we make that initial observation, we think, okay, this is how I'm feeling for something. What are the different behaviors that I can choose? And for students, obviously they're still at that point, and for all of us, we are very instinctual, right? Like, so certain situations happen and we, sometimes we go impulsive, and then other times when we know we're in a surrounding that it's not favorable to respond and and maybe your first thought, then again, you're like accessing that cognitive demand, those cognitive functions to help support that emotional experience. So hope that wasn't too complicated, and I'll go a little bit deeper as I wait for you to ask me a question.
Okay. Well, you know what? Let's go right into it. So we were talking about you're going to give our audience 3 strategies to building your child's emotional awareness. So let's talk about that and what that means or what that entails.
Yeah. So the awesome thing right now that makes emotional awareness so relevant are emojis. Come on. Everybody loves emojis. And the truth of the matter is, like, if your children are pre-K or TK, like they're still in daycare or they're in high school, they're using emojis. And emojis give us a range, like this huge spectrum of emotions to choose from. And especially as we're teaching our children to name them. So I printed this out as an example. It's not beautifully colored, but I'm going to give you all, 3 different ways that you can support your child's emotional awareness. So the first way is to, and you know what I'll do, Patty, and I will send you a PDF, and then you can also attach it to, to send out to your folks.
Yeah,
but once you print
awesome.
it out, you put it in a sheet. Yes. And this is more, let's say, like a daycare age to 7th grade, maybe 6th grade. You can put this into a sheet protector, and you can have your kid tell you how they feel as they're going through different tasks, or as they come home from school or before school, and they just circle on top of the sheet protector, right? Because the sheet protector makes anything like a dry erase board. And so once they, circle how they feel, you might start to ask them, like, well, can you describe that feeling? And what's important about this is because, and this is actually, it's not sad, it's just the truth. Even the emotions we hear adults say are mad, angry, happy, sad. We aren't hearing disappointed, frustrated, annoyed. We're not hearing the complexity and the difference between the little nuances between different emotions. And while we as adults understand it, reading has helped us understand it, just being, interacting with other human beings has helped us. But we need to be more explicit when we're engaging our kids in conversations, so then they have that emotional awareness, right? So when they're upset at school, they're not just mad. They can say, well, I was really disappointed because blah, blah, blah happened, right? And they have, with this, a visual to kind of help them think about it. So the first strategy is, having some type of tool where they can point. And this might even be something people blow up and put on a wall in the bedroom, depending on, how, comfortable and just whatever they decide. But I think that would actually be really awesome, especially for smaller children, to have a poster and then you can just point to how you feel and, start thinking about different ways to say some of these more common emotions. The next would be, still having your sheet, to come up with 5 different ways to name an emotion. And this is huge. So this little face here, he could be sad, he can feel lonely, he can be disappointed, he can be withdrawn. A child probably isn't going to say that. He could be hurting, right? And now the child has 5 different ways of relating an emotion that might have a similar face. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Research shows that students who have been neglected or abused have more difficulty distinguishing the difference between emotions as far as when they're looking at someone's faces, right? So that means what you might perceive as serious may not be serious to me. Maybe someone had a household where their parent went from here to here to here to here to here, right? Their emotional exposure has been all over the place. So then when they go to school or they go around other people, it's well, can't you tell I'm serious? No, they can't. Right? So we can't assume that everyone has the same emotional experiences. And the more words that we have in our vocabulary to describe how we feel, the more it benefits everybody around us. And that is crucial. I mean, especially for someone who has worked with children, been around children in my own family, understanding that we all perceive emotions differently is something really big. And that maybe lonely doesn't have the same trigger for you as like hurting. But now you can describe how you feel in a way that other people understand it, right? And there's some power in that. I think a lot of times, you know, especially with children, they're told how to feel. And so they're not really connecting with that part of themselves.
I was going to ask you the question too, because it's interesting. And you made me think about it. If your child is describing, you know, especially because we're not, you know, with a teacher-student relationship, it's definitely one thing. But when we're speaking mom to child relationship and they point to a face and they say a word that you wouldn't describe as that emotion, you know, what do we do? And do we correct them, or do we say interesting, like that you feel that that was lonely, or, you know, and it's, you know, I mean, it could be the example of where it doesn't seem to match at all, or where there's a smiley face and they seem lonely, you know, do we probe that? Could it be like that, you know, that means something there? You know, so I guess I'm asking you, like, well, how would you recommend that we address that?
So I would say go with your gut. And as you're saying, probing, absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me more about this phase, you know, being lonely or being happy. I mean, you know, especially if they feel more, I mean, you can feel kind of their excitement or their intensity if they feel really intense around one, you know, tell me, and another, excuse me, another thing you might say is, tell me a time that you felt that way. You know, like, how did that feel, and what came up for you? And this gets into our next strategy. How did you make yourself feel better? We always want to think about the next step. We need to feel these emotions on any level. They give us fuel, but we want to really focus on feeling better, because when we feel better, we think better, we act. I don't want to say we act better, but, you know, we make better choices, make better decisions for ourselves. And we're coming from a place of love. We know what happens when we feel upset, right? We know the neurochemicals, all those things have, you know, kind of come and affect our judgment, affect the ways that we're thinking. So, you know, the more that we can constantly focus, well, how did you make yourself feel better? Or, oh, you know, Johnny felt that way today. Maybe Johnny is a sibling, or maybe Johnny is another student in the classroom. Well, what did Johnny do? And how might you have helped Johnny feel better? Right? So there's those different
Got it.
ways. Yeah. And I don't know, I want to make sure, just because I'm also a doctoral student, and I want to make sure that I'm representing the research correctly. So the research was on emotional expressions, and it was with with children who were physically and emotionally neglected, as well as abused. And what they found is that the students that had those experiences, depending on the range, had a more limited emotional vocabulary and a more limited emotional understanding of the different expressions that matched the different emotions. And, you know, I think a lot of times we make, you know, of course we do, we make judgments, and we're like, okay, well, in this area, we may not experience that. Like, these kids, you know, aren't experiencing neglect. The truth is, neglect is one of the biggest childhood adverse experiences. And that's because, you know, a lot of people are busy, and especially these days with all the technology, that folks are, you know, not necessarily engaging and kind of showing the range of their emotions with their children. And, you know, I was shocked, because I was like, well, you know, you hear these stories about people with like long working hours or multiple jobs. I'm like, crap, that is neglect. You know, I mean, they're not in front of their child. And as their children are kind of going through these emotional experiences, they're not there to help facilitate them, right? And that's the goal. And that's where it's going to that third strategy of like, we want to facilitate our students' higher functioning and our children's, better judgment. And so making ourselves feel better is critical. That is so, I can't even say like that. There's so much sense of agency with that, because it's also empowering, like, I can make myself feel better. Oh my God, yeah. Can you imagine if we were children, how I would feel with that? And even as adults, sometimes we feel like we have no choice, but we definitely have a choice to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah, no, just as you're saying that, even like neglect, and as a mom, like my heart just dropped, and I was like, oh my God, immediately I'm like, when have I neglected my children, or how am I I think I'm neglecting them. Like immediately those feelings of guilt come up. I work from home, and so I'm here, and but not always engaging or present. I'm available.
Yeah.
And it's tough, and it's tough, and you're right.
Yeah.
They need to understand how to process their emotions. And sometimes it's difficult for us to disconnect from what we're doing in order to help them do that. And it's not, neglect in the terms that you might think is it like the CPS neglect, like not feeding your children,
yeah.
or not. But there is an emotional neglect that can happen. It's so painful to hear that for me. But it's an interesting awareness.
Yes, thank you. And that's one of the myths, right, of neglect, because even as an educator, before, like having your kids, I was thinking neglect is students with bad hygiene, right? Or children
right. That's what you think.
Have obvious signs of unclean clothes and blah, blah, blah. And to know that it could be, the long working hours, the attorney who has, Sundays that they're working a full work day, I'm like, oh my gosh. But that's also why the time that we spend even going through something like this is really critical, and it's really helpful. I mean, of course, we would want to be around our children all the time, or maybe not, right? But the time that we're setting aside with them is just extremely meaningful. And you'll start to hear them use these words, in their everyday, in their play, right? It's just such an eye-opening experience.
Yes, absolutely. It's really important. So let's move on, because then we have the second point and the third point still to cover. Okay, so let's move on to the second one.
Okay, so
we covered the second one.
We did. Oh, okay. So the seclike one, and I'll say it over, I don't mind, because repetition
kind of work together, right? Didn't they? Like we kind of like rolled into it.
Yeah. So the next one would be to, so the first one is circling how you feel, right, and why, or identifying however you have this posted around. The next might be identifying 5 different emotions that fit with each face, right? So yummy, delicious, or whatever, all the ones that might come with like tasting. And then the next is, how do you make yourself feel better? So it's like, oh, I really felt like this today. What does that mean? And, even for, children who are in the late junior high to high school, they might use words like isolated and depressed and blah, blah, blah. You can use emojis for that, and the conversation that you might start with them is, like, what emoji do you use the most? Or just like kind of silly questions.
Oh,
obviously,
I like that.
I
really like
if
that.
you sound too investigative, you're not going to get anything. So you just kind of play it cool and get that and start to embed or integrate more emotional language inside of your conversations. And for whatever age, our third strategy of what will make you feel better is something that we should always be using. We should always be. So that happened and you felt like crap. So what did you do to make yourself feel better?
Right.
Sound regular. Don't do it to if it sounds like a psychologist, then you're not going to get anything.
Yeah, they're just going to be like, whatever, mom, and like walk away. Yeah, I think my son, my oldest is 8, and I think he still would like do the eye roll for me. So,
yeah,
depending, it's like, mom, just leave me alone. I'm like,
totally
failed.
And another way too, I was thinking as I looked at this one with the exes, you might say, I was talking to my friend today, and she called this like gross. What do you call that? Like just something that like baits them.
Oh,
and they're like,
I totally love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, or even say, like, why do you use this emoji? Like, why would you use this emoji?
Yeah.
Like, I have no, like, I've never used this. Like, what would you use this for? Like, disgusting or whatever.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and maybe it's like you guys start telling stories with emoji, right? Like, I mean, that's what's so amazing about this is there's so many different directions that you can go, and it's empowering. Emojis are here to stay. They are not going anywhere, even if people don't like them. So let's own that and build our emotional capacity up. That's amazing.
That's so fantastic. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I think those are 3 amazing. I love the idea of having like a poster, or definitely, pointing to the emoji, using 5. So the first point was pointing to the emoji, 5 words to describe that emoji. And then how do you make yourself feel better? Of course, if the emoji is something sad or, hopeless or whatever it is that it is.
Yeah.
So
even with that, Trish, I do want to say, even our positive emotions, like there's also a spectrum, right? And this kind of gets in a little Eastern philosophy, but sometimes we can be too excited. So it's like, what is your happy place? Like what's your happy, like I just feel really good emoji. And it might be maybe the kissy face, but it might be like this one, and it's just like you're just feeling really good. That would be really, it's nice for them too to understand, like, wow, I know that you were really silly with this one, but now you want to like, be a little bit more calm, and like we do our best thinking. It's the same thing. If we're experiencing exhilaration or ecstasy or ecstatic feelings, we're not also going to be doing our best thinking, right? Like we're just going to be kind of in the zone.
Yeah, and it's so just thinking about this, especially with texting your kids back and forth, it's an interesting way or for you to figure out what they mean by that emotion specifically. Like you sent me this, was like, what did you mean? And that may be a way for them to open up, almost like how people are much more honest when they leave their like nasty messages online, because there's that, that illusion of you can't see me, so I can be honest. That if you're having trouble, like, it just came to me, like, if you're having trouble communicating with a kid, or with a child, saying like, hey, why don't you text me what you're feeling, all in emojis, and then maybe that could begin a conversation.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because as you said that, you made me think, I had a girlfriend who, there's that emoji that's like, I don't know, like their mouth is like all teeth. And for me, that was like like kind of a sneaky emotion. And for her, it was like, like I just messed up. I just effed up emoji. And so like, there would be times, right? And, or like she was like, it could even be scared. And so when I would add that in there, it was just, she's like, why do you use that face? And it's like, because, for me, I'm like, hee. And she didn't get that from it. So, this also teaches our kids that just because you experience it one way does not mean someone experiences it the same. And that's why having that language is key. Do I have to believe the same face is lonely? No. But if you use that word, then now I know, and then that's going to not trigger, but that will prompt me to do, X, Y, and Z because you're experiencing that emotion. I don't want you to feel that way or something, right? Versus, well, you don't feel that way, and that's not what that means. And it's like, no, we're not telling, right? If there's anything we get out of today, it's that we are not telling children how they feel. It's happened for too long. We are where we are in this world, and things are evolving. And the more that we give the language, the more agency that they have, the more that they can advocate for themselves when you're not around, when the parent isn't there. And they can make choices that make themselves feel better.
That's so, so wonderful. Thank you so much. I knew this was going to be a great conversation, but this was so much more educational and practical. And because you had said in our conversation, like, stop me if I get too teachy or whatever, but I have to say that it's been a fascinating conversation, and really a practical application or practical use for this at home is great, because it's true. My kids love emojis, and especially the thing is like those little emoji pillows, like, if you really want to get a range of emoji pillows and pull that out, right now is a great time. You pick up a few of those and you have your child, give you the pillow that most means what they
or hugging the pillow. That's really interesting. I know some people who in their social work practice or their counseling practice, they have those pillows, and they help students, feel more comfortable. Like there's something in like the hugging the pillow that helps them kind of like release and connect to an emotion. So yeah, I recommend people get those pillows. That's awesome.
Yay. Okay. We came up with a plan together. Yeah. All right. So we're going to wrap it up. This has been so amazing. And we're going to upload the PDF. I'll upload the files into the Facebook group for anyone who is listening that's not in the Facebook group. It'll be in the Facebook community, Happy Mama community. And I'll upload the file there. So anyone who's in the community, you can get it automatically then when I put the show up too. So any last words before we end?
No, I'm so honored to be here with you all. And I think the work that you do is extremely important for the work that I do inside of schools, and just knowing that, home is such it has such an influential role in our students' development, our children's lives. And so even taking the time out to have this conversation or listen to this conversation with us, and then taking that into your home is just like, so like it puts me above the moon. Like, I'm just so excited to be a part of this process. And, I want to make sure that if people want to reach out to me, that I am in the group, so they can, I'll be tagged in this video, but feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. If you want particular resources, I have those as well. I'm, as you can tell, I'm just really passionate and committed to this work, and I feel very privileged to have this conversation with you, Trish.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Erin. And I think I might introduce into the group too, like, a Q&A with a special expert, and I'll bring you in on that so that we can have a day where people can just ask questions about this type of thing. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for taking your time out. This was such an awesome, awesome interview. So informational. Thanks a lot. And to you,
yes,
Happy
thank
Mamas.
you.
The screen froze. Okay, say it again.
Right. No, I was just going to say, I feel happy. I feel delighted. I feel content. I feel ecstatic. I feel alive. I feel, I'm just playing around, but
that's awesome.
My positive emotion meter is like boom, 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 boom.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to you, Happy Mamas, who tuned in today. We will be back soon. Have a great day. Bye.